We live in America, and for America's 250th birthday, we should be celebrating. Every headline should be talking about celebrating the greatest democratic experiment in human history. Instead, the country is arguing about war and whether our president violated international norms in doing so, how corruption by our president, by appointing loyalists, would protect him instead of the Constitution, how our president's causing economic disasters on multiple fronts, from illegal detentions of our own citizens, illegal tariffs, and now an illegal war that is causing the world markets to collapse. Our gas prices are going up exponentially at the highest rates they have in over 25 years, and whether the rule of law still applies to the most powerful man in the country. I know it's only 5 o'clock in the morning, but this is something that gets me up early and makes me think very hard about what our nation is doing by electing somebody who has no North Star.
Good morning and welcome to Coffee with Kevin. This morning I woke up with an old song stuck in my head. Some of you who grew up in the 1960s will remember it. At least that's where I remember it as a kid, listening to it after 1965. It's a song by Barry McGuire, and the name of the song is Eve of Destruction. That's a line in the song that kept echoing in my mind this morning, and it woke me up like an earworm. The Eastern world, it's exploding. When I first heard this song as a kid, it sounded like something from another time, but it was real. It was then. It was everything that I was exposed to as a child growing up in the 1960s and 70s, during the Cold War, during Vietnam, a time when the world felt unstable and dangerous. But this morning, listening to it again, what struck me wasn't the history. What struck me is how much of it still sounds like today. Instead of celebrating America's 250th birthday as the greatest democratic experiment in human history, we find ourselves arguing about war, corruption, and whether the rule of law still applies to the most powerful person in the country. I'm glad to share a few moments with you reflecting on something I spent 43 years doing, looking out the window of a train. Here's some things that I learned along that journey. When you run a locomotive, you learn something important about how movement on the railroad actually works. Nothing moves on the main line without authority. In signal territory, that authority comes from the signal system, a signal that tells you the track ahead is clear. But if the signal is at stop, you cannot move past it unless the dispatcher gives you explicit authority. In dark territory, it's even more precise and less defined, but it's still exact. Your authority might only go to a specific milepost. There's no physical gate there, there's no barrier, and there's no structure like a signal mast telling you to stop. Just a location in the ballast, an invisible line across the track. And on days like today when it's so foggy, it is immense pressure that's put on the engineer to know exactly where you are at all times so that you do not pass that line. And that pressure is immense. When the dispatcher gives you additional authority, then you can proceed, because the authority system exists for one reason: to keep trains from colliding with each other and with people who are working on the tracks. That can even include emergency responders who are working on fires or rescue or ambulance and police who are on or near the tracks. The dispatcher is the gatekeeper, and in a democracy, our Constitution serves a very similar role. It is the authority that governs movement. It is the document that defines the limits of power. And the moment people begin to believe that certain individuals can move past that authority whenever they want, the entire system becomes dangerous. The founders understood this. They weren't only worried about foreign enemies, they were worried about demagogues. Leaders who convinced people that loyalty to them matters more than loyalty to the Constitution. 250 years later, that warning still matters, because the real celebration of America's birthday isn't fireworks. The real celebration is whether the rule of law still holds, whether the authority of the Constitution still means something. Because when authority breaks down on a railroad, trains collide, people get hurt, and people die. And when authority breaks down in a democracy, the consequences are even far worse. And that's because of the immensity of the Constitution and the nation that upholds that Constitution. And that is why what we are watching right right now should alarm every American, no matter what political party you belong to. We have a president who increasingly behaves as if the limits of law do not apply to him. We see executive actions being challenged in courts, economic decisions sending shockwaves through global markets, and a foreign policy posture that has moved the United States towards a dangerous military confrontation in Iran without a clear, articulated long-term strategy. At the same time, the power of the federal government is being used in ways that many legal scholars and civil rights advocates are questioning. Immigration enforcement actions are expanding in a scope affecting not only undocumented migrants, but also communities that include people legally present in the United States. Those actions raise serious constitutional questions about due process and equal protection. And the day that you have people in masks that are trying to enforce the law, you don't know whether they're law enforcement or whether you're being kidnapped. Meanwhile, the economic consequences of international conflict are already hitting ordinary Americans. Energy prices are rising, markets are reacting, families are feeling it at the pump and at the grocery store. History teaches us something about moments like this. When loyalty to a leader begins to outweigh loyalty to the law, people start rationalizing things they would never have accepted before. They tell themselves that the rules can be bent this one time. They can convince themselves that power is justified because their side is holding it. But the Constitution was never designed to work that way. The Constitution is our dispatcher authority. It is our North Star. It is the system that tells every person in this country where the limits are and when it is safe to move forward. Because when a locomotive engineer ignores its authority, it doesn't just endanger itself, it endangers everyone. That is why this moment should concern every American who cares about the survival of our constitutional system. And as we look down the track of another day, let's keep the conversation rolling. And yes, what you did hear during this discussion was me spilling my coffee all over my keyboard. I hope you have a better day.